I want to emphasize the importance of the average American fully embracing this revolutionary moment, because that is what we're living through. And it is growing leaps and bounds by the day. And we know this because while I don't look at one specific poll as anything other than an outlier, the norm of consistency regarding where the United States and its citizenry feels as of this moment regarding the state of Israel could not be more obvious, that we are moving in a direction away from supporting that country to the point in which the support will no longer exist in the not too distant future. Unfortunately, because of the fact that from a conscious perspective, the average American no longer wants anything to do with Israel. What that also means is that the powers that be have a choice. They're either going to adhere to the will of the people, or they're going to continue to double, triple, quadruple, and then some down on what they believe is the necessary direction that this country should be going in from this K-shaped economy that's broken beyond recognition at this point. And so with that said, despite all of the data that we are seeing, despite all of the information that has been presented to us in terms of how this country truly feels about the state of Israel, we are now faced with this reality about not only Israel, but the data centers that are popping up all over this country. So the piece that I wrote, which is a relatively short piece, but it's to the point, and it kind of covers a lot of the ground of what we were talking about, is going to follow what Colin, let's do the Instagram post first so we can sort of lay the foundation and then we can run into the story. And so here is what is the current state of affairs regarding this Section 224 of what would be the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act. So, Colin, can I please have what I requested? I need the Instagram story. Congress quietly moves to integrate U.S. and Israeli militaries. So if you can't convince the people to support this initiative, what's the next best thing? You just go behind their backs and don't tell them about it. Buried in the House's version of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, released on Tuesday, is Section 224 entitled United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. The provision would arguably do more to intertwine the U.S. military and the Israeli military than more than the $200 billion that we're aware of in military assistance Israel has received from the U.S. since its founding in 1948. Section 224 lays the groundwork for bilateral research and development, co-production of weapons, joint ventures, licensing agreements, and seemingly every manner of the U.S. military-industrial complex cooperation. The U.S. and Israel already work together heavily on missile defense, but this provision would greatly expand coordination to seemingly every area of defense tech, including AI, quantum, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber biotech, and much more. It also proposes network integration and data fusion. In other words, the U.S. military's data could soon be the Israeli military's data. Not soon, but will be. If fully enacted, this proposal would provide a higher level of military-industrial integration than the U.S. has with any other country in the world. To be sure, the U.S. has worked closely with its NATO partners on co-production and shared supply chains, most notably via the Defense Production Action Plan. And as the number one arms dealer in the world, of course we are, the U.S. provides weapons to militaries across the globe. But that is mostly a one-way street, with the U.S. providing weapons to foreign buyers who only occasionally make parts for those weapons themselves, as in the case of the F-35's global supply chain. Section 224 would be a different beast entirely. It would fuse the U.S. and Israeli defense sectors in multiple areas vital to the battlefields of the future, like autonomous systems and cyber. It would also bring extraordinary Israeli influence to the U.S. beyond what is already, and through the Israel lobby and its robust network of social media influencers. It would give the Israeli government the opportunity to greatly expand one of the most powerful levers of influence in U.S. politics: jobs in the U.S. And that's the big one. We've seen over the years, I always point to Elizabeth Warren being the biggest hypocrite of them all, because this is a person who claims to be on the side of not being part of the war machine. And yet, when it comes to jobs, especially defense jobs, they're a very big part of the Massachusetts economy. And she is fully on board with that. So we're going to also get to Bernie shortly, and you'll see why. So this is a huge part of it. The jobs program is often what gets people to shut up, because if the economy becomes so dependent on this idea that if we do not go along to get along because it would affect our economic balance, this is how they get away with crimes against humanity, war crimes. They just integrate it seamlessly into our economy that we don't see. But remember, this is coming up for a vote, and you're going to be able to know who's on your side and who's on the side of not only forever war, but prefers Israel over the United States. By expanding or starting new co-production facilities like it already has in Mississippi and Arkansas, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, what is the common thread amongst the two states, Arkansas and Mississippi? They happen to be two of the three poorest states in the country, along with West Virginia. So why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because it basically drives this unholy alliance together, in a sense that when you have two states like Mississippi and Arkansas that are desperate for any type of commerce, they're getting it through the military-industrial complex, and they sure as hell are not going to complain about it. If this is going to produce jobs, it's going to create some type of an economic whirlwind that is positive for these two states in particular. Then everything else be damned. You put people in desperate situations, they are going to go down this road. And so, it is thereby securing allies among members of Congress who represent the districts whose jobs where those jobs lie. So this is a tale as old as time. This has been going on forever. It's how you keep people in line. Jobs, baby. We don't ask how the jobs got there. We don't even ask what the jobs do. We just ask, are they going to pay a living wage? Good. Then all other questions are not relevant. The result could well be a U.S. political system even more susceptible to the whims of an Israeli government that seemingly has no qualms about drawing the U.S. into military conflicts in the Middle East. The unprecedented level of U.S.-Israeli military integration stands in stark contrast to the traditional air model of defense cooperation, in which Israel already stood out as the top recipient of U.S. military assistance, as laid out in a recent Quincy Institute brief, authored by one of us, Steve Simon. This shift from an aid model to a military integration model has troubling implications. Namely, the shift will strip away the political and diplomatic oversight mechanisms that make the relationship publicly accountable, moving it from a visible annual aid vote into the opaque machinery of defense acquisition, where oversight is limited and political accountability is minimal. The result would be a defense relationship that is simultaneously deeper and less transparent. This all comes at a time when the Israeli military has repeatedly used U.S. weapons in strikes that have violated international humanitarian laws in Gaza. And as Israel has repeatedly violated ceasefires, what ceasefire? As has the U.S. itself, in the Trump administration's unnecessary war with Iran. And now we know for sure why the war with Iran is even happening. So the enormous gulf between what most Americans want and what the president is doing when it comes to Israel and what Congress is proposing here should not be ignored. Just 30% of respondents to a New York Times Siena poll from mid-May believes Trump made the right decision to go to war with Iran, with 64% saying it was wrong. An Institute for Global Affairs poll released earlier this week dove even deeper into the American psyche when it comes to arming Israel, finding that just 16% say the U.S. should keep supplying Israel with weapons without new restrictions. 38% want to stop supplying weapons entirely, and another 24% want weapons conditioned on how they're used. Fat chance. Yet mainstream leadership in both parties remains largely pro-Israel and continues to shape the base legislative test before amendments and broader congressional debate open it to the full body, as in the case with this NDAA provision. Though slowly, tides within both parties are shifting as more and more members speak out against the growing divide between Israel's actions and Americans' interests. For example, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland wrote in the New York Times on Tuesday that the Democratic Party has provided reflexive and unconditional support to Israeli governments, even as their actions have increasingly undermined American interests and values. On the Republican side of the aisle, Representative Thomas Massie and former Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene have openly decried the Israel, that appears to have cut off there. But what can other members of Congress who are concerned about Israel's destabilizing actions do right now? Stop the Israeli-U.S. military-industrial merger in its tracks. Lawmakers should reject Section 224 from the NDAA to avoid deep integration with Israel's military at a time when a growing number of Americans oppose Israel's actions in the region. Now, what are the odds of something like that happening? The odds are extremely low. And as I wrote in my Substack that you guys can check out at substack.com/@revolutionary-change, and Colin, if you can cue that one up real quick so that people can see, I'm going to show them the basic rundown of what we put together. There is another little hidden caveat to this affair that a lot of people are probably not aware of. The secret U.S.-Israel alliance via AI data centers. And if you scroll down on that picture so people can see, and this is from Roya English, over 12,000 U.S. citizens currently serve in the Israeli military. Now, here's the big question. Are these American soldiers being conscripted to serve for the state of Israel? Or is it even more sinister? Are these American citizens showing loyalty to the state of Israel over the United States? Perhaps it's both. But if we know for sure that there are 12,000 American soldiers in uniform serving on behalf of the IDF, that's a big problem. A huge problem. In fact, it's a borderline treasonous problem, if not outright treason. And we should all know this. So there shouldn't be any secrets here. And as I've pointed out, since there's a number of kind of crossover points here, but since the outset of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, the public opinion regarding our country's support for the Zionist state has taken a dramatic turn from majority positive to overwhelmingly negative. And according to that latest poll, only 16% still support providing unconditional military aid. Now, as a result of the economic and environmental devastation they are leaving in their wake, public opinion is dramatically turning against AI data centers. So how is our government choosing to respond to the will of the people? Secretly merge the U.S. and Israeli militaries technologically via Section 224 of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act. So this provision would synchronize the two military networks through data fusion, that is using the emerging AI data centers. So that's where the connection between Israel and the data centers are being shown in full view of everyone. That's the big connection here. This is the part of the story that cannot be ignored. In fact, it's one of the most important developments that we have ever seen. So when you have the likes of Larry Fink at BlackRock coming out and explicitly saying, you will not mess with our data centers, now you're understanding why. The importance of this merging of the relationship, the corporate with the military state as one and the same, that is effectively what is happening here and why these AI data centers are becoming such a critical talking point to our daily lives. Just as we point out constantly the importance of remembering that Israel and the State Department's alliance is the primary driver for foreign policy around the world, when it comes to domestic policy, there is nothing more significant in this moment than these AI data centers. Now we know that they're one and the same. And that should not come as any surprise. The provision will also expand weapons manufacturing for Israel in Mississippi and Arkansas, as was pointed out in the other article. This defense jobs program would create even more undue influence for the Israel lobby over our government and its elected officials. That's the way it's always done, and that's the way it will continue to be done. If you tie in economic dependency through foreign policy, even if it's the state of Israel, as I've often said, this is the biggest reason why people keep their mouths shut when it comes to the genocide. Not that people generally like Israelis. I think we can all safely say that they are the most unlikable people, and we've got a very fun story later this evening you will love about the Israelis. What you have to remember is that when it is all tied to the economic dependency of our collapsing empire, this is where they are able to get away with what they get away with. Not because necessarily everybody agrees with what's going on, but because it is painfully obvious that this is what economic dependency really looks like when you have no leg to stand on. So that's essentially what we're dealing with here, and it's a pretty big problem. So we will now see that despite 3 out of 4 Americans outright rejecting war with Iran, it is easy to see now why the supermajority will of the people is being rejected in favor of renewed bombing of Tehran, which, as you all know, commenced once again over the last 48 hours. Keep coming down, scrolling, Colin. With over 12,000 troops fulfilling active military duty on behalf of Israel, it is easy to surmise how much further this regional war could expand should the Trump administration actually follow through on re-implementing the draft. When Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu Milikowski was recently prompted at an Israeli town hall about the state's next plans for Gaza, he simply said, "We now control 60% of the land. Soon it will be 70%. The crowd, unprompted, burst into a chant of 100%, indicating that the intention was always to colonize the entire strip as well as vast swaths of the region, hence Greater Israel. The only way this will not happen is if the American people rise up and force the severing of this relationship with Israel forever. Does your congressional representative support Section 224? Find out now before it's too late." This is primarily why we say that revolution or nothing is the path we are heading towards. Because again, it doesn't matter what we say, what we think, or how we lean on our federally elected representatives. It is an unfortunate tragedy that we have come to this point.